so I'm going to start with some thank yous for last Sunday. Crystal, you did a fabulous job. Tell Tyler he did a great job. Clayton did a great job. Y'all survived just fine without me. That's good news. You missed me. Oh, thank you.
When's your next vacation?
When's my next vacation? Yeah, there's always one. Actually, it's not scheduled yet. So, Crystal got to tell you about Blessed Are the Merciful, and she did a fabulous job. And if you missed it, it's online, and you can go listen to her. So I'm just going to go back to the beginning. When we all started, we all agreed on some things, and the first thing is we agreed that God's not done with us. How many of you still think God's not done with you? Now, some of you must be thinking that God's done with you because you didn't raise your hand. The second thing we agreed is that there's still more to being a Christian than what we're living. And I said, if you believe that, say amen.
Amen.
And then the last one, there is more to this life. And if you believe that, turn to a neighbor and say, there's more.
There's more.
There is more. Now, we started with blessed are the poor in spirit, and we talked about what that meant, and then we talked about blessed are those who mourn, and we've talked about how blessed are the meek and the hungry, and we noticed that every time Jesus says blessed are somebody, he's really turning his world upside down. Because every time he said blessed are, the people he chose to say as blessed were the people that his society said were not. And that was true last week as well. When Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, the teachers and leaders of his day go, gosh, where has this guy been? Doesn't he know that we live in a dog-eat-dog world? We live in a world where mercy is weak, where we have to watch out for number one, and Crystal made it really clear that in the world of Jesus, in the world of discipleship, we're called to be merciful. And that brings us to this week, and this week the theme is blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And this one, is more than hand sanitizer. It really is. Because being pure in heart, when you start to do the research in this, being pure means being without sin in Jesus' conversation. So the first thing Jesus does is he says, blessed are the pure, and the world is turned upside down again, because I don't know about you, but in my world, we're all guilty of sin. And that's just part of the bad news. It's also part of the good news. Because we're made clean by what Jesus did for us. His life, his death, his burial, his resurrection gives us the opportunity to stand before Jesus, before God, and say, Father, I've sinned, please forgive me. And no, see, it's not a matter of, a coin flip. We don't go before God and God pulls out his coin and says, heads, you're forgiven, tails, you're not. Click. No. Jesus says, with Jesus' life, death, burial, and resurrection, tells us that we can go before God and be made pure so that we can see God. Now, this is important because in the Jewish world, you weren't supposed to see God. This was a big deal. When he says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God, every religious person in Jesus' day dropped their Bibles and fell down in a dead faint. That's how big a deal this was. When you tell Jews that they can go and see God, they go, oh no. They don't even say God's name. This past week, I had a friend in Illinois pass away, and they were, in fact, it was a husband and a wife. They died within like 24 hours of each other. They were precious. They were wonderful. They always treated me with such great respect and such love and such encouragement. And that community is going to miss them. But it just reminded me of how different the two worlds were, because in their announcement of their parents' death, every time the word God showed up, they didn't say it. They spelled it out. G blank D. Now you knew that it was, may God's blessing rest upon the family. But it's not what it said. They were devout. And Jesus says, they're missing out. Now, interestingly enough, we oftentimes had conversation about that, the three of us. And they were devout and holy people. But they had missed this. They had missed this opportunity to stop having to worry about keeping the law so strictly because of grace. And this grace brings forgiveness. And this forgiveness brings cleansing. If we want to really know what this is like, some of you are old enough. No, all of you except Rachel are old enough, probably. And Daniel. And James. Maybe Will. I think that's everybody. Everybody else is old enough to remember a toy. I keep looking for them. I can never find one. I'm going to have to go to that toy provider and see if they have them. And it's a clipboard. And you got a plastic pen. And you could write on it or draw on it. And then, when you were done and it was beautiful, you could show it to Mama or Daddy or Grandpa. I'm going to have to start thinking about grandpas. And Grandpa. And then, it was gone. The slate was wiped clean. And so that, my friends, is what purity is. Purity is having our slates wiped clean. Turn to a neighbor and say, wipe that slate clean. Now, here's the really cool thing. You know that toy where you go like that, it disappears? You can do it every day?
Yeah.
That's right. In fact, some of us may need to do it more than once a day. You notice I didn't point at anybody out there. Right. But, you see, purity, Jesus says, when you're blessed and when you're pure, and of course there's more to it than just having the slate wiped clean, because Jesus would really like us to work at not dirtying up the slate again. At least with the same thing, yeah. We're supposed to learn from our mistakes. How many of you ever learned from a mistake?
Yeah.
How many of you sometimes have to make the mistake 6 or 7 times before you really learn from it? Yeah. You all get that right. Well, blessed, Jesus says, are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Jesus is saying, happy are those who are pure, who are clean, that's where Ben Franklin got the idea that cleanliness is next to godliness. It's not in the Bible, folks. It's in Ben Franklin. And he's right, I think. There's some rightness to it. But God says, here, actually, let's start with what the world says. The world, when it talks about being pure, says, no, don't worry about it. Just do what you need to do to get what you need to get, to have what you want to have. Make it all about you. God says, blessed are the pure, those who operate without motive. Those who love because they're loving. Those who give without thought of getting back. Those who share because somebody has a need. You see, this idea of giving and of being thankful go hand in hand. I'm a firm believer that if you really want to live a happier life and have more in life, we have to learn to say thank you more. We have to learn to be more grateful, more appreciative. And not because of whatever it is might do for us, but for whatever it is might do for others. See, we do this work with Habitat, and we do this work with Junction City Local Aid. And one of the things, I love the fact that we do all this work for Junction Aid, or Junction City Local Aid, and virtually never see a face. Think about that for a minute. I forget how many families we touch every year at Junction City Local Aid, but it's hundreds. And we do it because we care. Not because it makes us feel important. Not because somebody said we should. But because we can. Because it's good for our souls to give. So, the world says things like any way you can, everything you can, all the ways you can. God says, be real, be you, be filled with integrity. Don't cheat. Don't cut corners. The promise, of course, is kind of a big one. When we're living life purely, we see God. And it was kind of like what I did with the children this morning. Sometimes we get caught up and we say, well, gosh, we never see God. And I walk into a room and I'm going, how can you not see God in this place? How can you not look outside and see God at work? How can you not look at what's happening in the world and see where God really is touching lives? Because I think it's really obvious where God is touching lives. You know why? Because it's where we see love happening. It's where we see grace happening. It's where we see forgiveness happening. It's where we see people's lives being changed without any expectation of return. One of the things that my family has done in the past is we have hosted young people in our homes, and we always get asked, well, are you going to try to convert them? Oftentimes they were Lutherans or Catholics, and sometimes they were Muslims, and the answer was no. We're going to be who we are. Why? Because that's who God's called us to be. And every year we get Christmas cards from my Muslim friends. Now, think about that for a minute. Christmas cards from your Muslim friends.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
It was pretty awesome. When we touch people's lives with pure motive and pure hearts, and I'm not saying that we don't mess up, because we do, but when our motives are right, when our hearts are right, then not only are others blessed, but so are we. Because we get to see God.